I'm Richard Bartle. I'm Professor of Computer Game Design at the University of Essex, and this is my second talk for DALI, the Natural Language Processing group, on the subject this time of fun in games. Now, in the previous talk I explained why we are using games, games with a purpose, and I said that the games that people are playing involve tasks which they find intrinsically interesting. That doesn't mean, however, that the games are themselves going to be fun. So how do you make a game fun? Well, that's a talk for later, because first you need to understand what fun is. And lucky you, nobody really does. However, I'm going to give you a shot at what people think at the moment. So the first thing to point out is that although games generally are fun, they don't have to be fun. Sometimes games with a purpose are deadly serious. Russian roulette is probably the most obvious answer there. But you can have games that are fun for different reasons. You might find a game fun today, but tomorrow maybe it isn't fun. Tomorrow you might think you're in a different mood, you don't like that game, you're not really interested, you're not quite as drunk. What's fun for individuals can change. What's fun for an individual can change over the course of playing a game. I mean, it might start off fun, but when you start to lose, perhaps it's not quite as much fun as it was. Now, there are different degrees of fun. Some games are more fun than others, and there are different degrees of the opposites of fun. Because you see, games have got two opposites, not just one. One opposite is no fun. A game is no fun if it's just too easy. I mean, some things like knocking over toddlers, they're quite fun, but you can knock over toddlers all day long, at least until the police arrive. So although it's initially fun, actually after a while it gets a bit boring because there's no real challenge to it. On the other hand, games can be unfun, and that's when you're playing a game and you're making no substantial progress and you're not really getting anywhere, and it's a real push and you're not getting through. Now, in between fun and no fun, in between unfun and no fun, there is fun, and this is the sweet spot where the games are just hard enough to make them interesting, but not so hard to make them unplayable. At least for you, it might be playable for other people. Some people like games which are generally easy, and some people like games which are generally hard. So it's not just the case that you can just draw a straight line and say everything above this and everything below this is unfun or no fun, because it does change depending on the individual and depending on the time of day or phase of the moon or state of your digestion. So, assuming then that we are in a game that's fun, what does it mean to say that the game is fun? Now, let's see where it gets awkward. Some languages don't even have a word for fun. I remember giving a talk to some Germans, and I asked them, "What's the German for fun?" And there isn't a German word for fun. They were well aware of their reputation. So it wasn't actually quite as racist as this makes it sound. But the point is that it's a very difficult concept to nail down. People, if you ask them, why are you playing that game? Oh, it's fun. But then you say, well, what's fun about it? And narrow it down. Tell me what's fun. Then it gets a bit harder. Now, there are basically four things that people, academics at least, will consider fun when they're looking at computer games in particular. The first thing that they would think is fun is learning. So when people were evolving, you had to learn. If you didn't learn, you got eaten by bears. So the more you learned, then the better you were at surviving. But the human brain needs some reward for learning. Otherwise it wouldn't learn. So you get all these dopamine things coming in through and making you happy, and whoa, that's good. So you quite like learning. Didn't just mean to say you like being taught, just means to say you like learning things. When you're playing a game, you are learning things. You're essentially learning how to beat the game, how to beat the opponents, or beat the computer, So you're learning strategies, and this is why games are good at high order problem solving, because these are the kind of things that you're doing repeatedly in games. So if you're trying to learn something, then when you start off you don't know much. If it's too hard, you're not going to learn anything at all. If it's too easy, you probably already know it, but there's that sweet spot and you start following that. But once you've understood the game enough, then it starts to tail off. It starts to become no fun. You already know it. Or you start seeing things you think, oh no, I know I can win this, but it's just going to take forever because, oh, there's just so many enemies. But I know I'm going to win, in which case that's starting to become no fun. It's a bit of a chore. So this understanding of games, we call it grokking. To grok something, it's out of a Heinlein novel. It means to understand something implicitly. So once you've played enough games of a particular kind, like real-time strategy games or something, you start playing another and you think, well, this is just the same as the previous one, just with different pictures, a bit of a different story, but the gameplay is the same. So that's one way of looking at games as being fun. Another way of looking at them is called flow, created by a guy called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, if you're wondering how to pronounce it. It wasn't created for games. This was created to explain why people who work in mindless jobs in factories manage to survive 8 hours without killing each other, and it turns out they get into this state called flow, which is a balance between how difficult something is and your skills. And if the difficulty and the skills are just right, in that same sort of sweet spot as for games, then you get into this state which is generally pleasurable. People like being in a flow state, and that's when they suddenly look at the watch and think, oh my goodness me, I've been playing this game for 3 hours, and I really should have been at a lecture 2 hours ago. Whatever. The flow and games are related because of that challenge and skill connection, but flow isn't all about what makes games fun, because you can be having fun playing a game and then suddenly get into a flow state, and flow doesn't stack. If you're having a dream and in the dream you have a dream, then when you come out of the inner dream, are you going to pop back to the middle dream? I mean, it's that kind of thing. So flow, although it can explain some games and why people find them fun, it doesn't explain all of it. Likewise, the earlier one, the grokking, doesn't always explain why games are fun. You can be finding a game fun because of other aspects, in like you might like to crush your enemies and hear the lamentations of their children. I mean, whatever. That there are reasons for playing games which aren't necessarily to do with learning. The third reason that people say that games are interesting is actually related to the fourth one, and this is called presence. So this is for games which have a world about them, and when you're playing a game, you start to be part of the game world. And although this is most obvious in computer games, particularly role-playing games, it's also the case for other kinds of games, even board games. You can really get into them and feel that it's not me moving pieces on the board, it's those are my armies and I'm moving them, and you're part of the game. This leads to the fourth way, which is immersion. And immersion is when you forget that you're, or not so much forget, you ignore the fact that you're in another reality and project yourself into the reality of the game fiction. People become immersed in all sorts of things. They can become immersed in books, they can become immersed in films, they can become immersed in other cultures, and of course if they fall into a swimming pool, then they're literally immersed. But that's what the idea is with games, is that when you're playing them and you become immersed in the world, that is what's fun. For my particular speciality of games, which we don't do for Dali because they're way too expensive, even beyond our considerable means, those in those cases, immersion is where you're trying to understand who you are. By becoming immersed in the game, you become immersed in your character, and then your character and you become the same person. So in that sense, immersion is about learning, which was the original one I mentioned for fun, and learning is what you're learning is who you are. So those are the main academic definitions of fun. Now, academics have got reasons for defining these things as fun. The one to do with learning, for example, is because if you want research funds to study games, there's no body you can go to and say, give me some funding please to understand how to make games more fun. Games are not academically respectable in that sense. So what you have to do is you have to go there and say, give me some money to make to understand how to make serious games to help people learn. Or if you're a psychologist, you probably could go in and say, I want to make a game to help understand some psychological theory. Or if you're coming from another direction, say artificial intelligence, you might want to make a game that exposes some AI technique or makes it compartmentalized so you can understand it better. So people come at it from different directions. There are games that are designed for teaching economics or as economics experiments, but what you really want, if you're studying games for fun, is to look at them and say, well, what is it that makes these games fun? Psychology would probably be the area to look at for that, except that most psychologists who study games are trying to prove that games will either corrupt your children, corrupt you, turn you into a mass murderer, or give you some kind of terrible addiction that you'll need to go into therapy to get out of. They're not really looking at what is it about games that makes them so much fun. Why do people like playing them? And how can we improve them so that we get better games? Now, in Dali, our subject matter is language. So our games are generally going to be something to do with language. And what we want from the players is something to do with tagging phrases. So that when people use words or use phrases, then we can extract data from their responses, and from that build databases that people can use in productive ways to understand other languages or their own languages or texts or things like that. So trying to build up a corpus of work in that area. So for us then, what it means is that we've got a task that we'd like people to do and that we think the people are going to like to do anyway, so we're building the game design around that task to try and make the game itself interesting to the player and fun. I mean, if you find matching pronouns with words fun, well, you could just read a book and do that, but really there's no direction to it. It's better if in finding the games fun, then there's some other aspect that you can build on. So finding what the pronoun is can build on that can be one of your core mechanics, but it can feed into something else that makes overall the game more fun. There are a number of techniques you can do this. You can embed it in the gameplay. You can embed it in the graphics, what we call the dressing. So there are ways to embody in a game fun such that it is enhanced. Now, as to how you would go about doing that, well, that again is a talk for another day, so I'll leave that for another day. Bye.